Over the last 2 days, you heard a lot about the building blocks of the autonomous enterprise. You heard even more so about generative AI. Sigh, big sigh. But how can we aggregate that into Horizon 3 innovation agenda? Or thinking of the other ways, can we crystallize that into practical terms? What the organization listening to us? What can they take away from that if they go back to their offices? Is it literally, is it just analyst fluff talking when we're talking about the autonomous enterprise? Or what's the practical terms of that? And I think an important part of that is also cutting through all the marketing noise on that. And perhaps a reminder, yesterday, Ralph reminded us, I think 70% of organizations would describe them as automation beginners. We know many organizations still struggle to scale automation. Similarly, cloud transformation, we're just doing a big piece of research. Probably 2/3 of organizations say they don't fully hit the strategic objectives that initially we're trying to achieve. So if you think about all these things, that even with more mundane stuff, things like automation, cloud, let alone almost new funky stuff like generative AI, don't know how real is that? What can we take away? But I think we need more context for that. And I think the more, what some of you see in that slide, time and time again, I'm not going through all this, and I think we need help driving those discussions. We talk about the autonomous enterprise. That's not the answer to all the burning questions, but it's just a conduit trying to drive those discussions. And perhaps almost the only thing to keep in mind, and almost set the stage for discussion for today, but I think also broader than that, in the end, the framework of the autonomous enterprise is all about the intersection of data and AI. But there's also a world where literally technology, bots, algorithms are the first point of interactions. And it's much deeper than just the front office stuff is predictive. It's much deeper. It's really reacting to things, and quite frankly, if you think things like cloud native operation, it's such a new complexity, and we have to be honest about that, not pretending cloud is simplification. So humans can't deal with that complexity anymore. So again, we have to think differently, but perhaps the most important point is not just about talking about technologies, how can we make it tangible? What are the operating models? And what we're seeing time and time again, especially on operating model, a good example is cloud. People just jump and trying to retrofit all the wonderful innovations, including cloud, but again, all the other change agents we were discussing over the last 2 days. And of course, you set up for failure because we have to rethink, reimagine many things, and that's literally what we're trying to discuss. And the good thing is, it's complex, but for that, I can't deal with it. My brain is mushy anyway after 2 days, but I have a brilliant panel can help me with that. How should we literally thinking about designing the innovation agenda for the autonomous model? Again, and by all means, push back. If you literally think that's just typical analyst speak, it's fluff, be frank about it. I think it was all about sharing experience. Perhaps not going in the video, full round of introduction. Ted, can we start with you? Of course, 0 rank and your number. But how do you think, if you work now for consultant, you drive many discussions, how are you trying to set the innovation agenda? How you try to help that? Does it resonate what you heard with us? How are you driving the agenda with your clients?
Sure, Tom. Ted Shelton, I'm a partner with Bain, and I am the global product leader for business process redesign, and they asked me to take that role because of my technology background. So I also focus on automation and artificial intelligence. And the advice that we are giving clients today is that you need to start by doing what we call zero-basing labor. So take your processes and say, what if there was 0 labor in this whole end-to-end workflow? Like, imagine being able to do everything with technology. And then take the next step back and say, well, wait, there may be things that we want humans to do in these processes. And we think there are 3 categories of work that we actually still want people to do: creativity, critical thinking, and interpersonal relationships. So look at those processes and say, where does critical thinking, creativity, or interpersonal relationships play a role? Those are the places we want people. Everywhere else, take the people out. And think about it then, maybe not all in one step, right? Because maybe the technology isn't here to do everything in that process today, but your journey will be eradicating all of the rest of those tasks, all the rest of that activity. And you need to put an organization in place that has that frame of mind. So they are redesigning all of the work in your organization around that principle.
That's good. Angela, you have quite a different lens on all of that. Real estate, same. Rank and seal numbers. How you try to drive the innovation agenda? What's top of your mind from a very specific lens?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Johnson, a partner at Fifth Wall, and I lead our capital formation team. Fifth Wall is the largest venture capital firm focused on what I call the collision of the real estate industry and technology. So what is really interesting about our model is that we are a traditional venture capital firm, but we take a very different approach to how we introduce technology to what I call probably the oldest industry colliding with the newest industry in the world. Our $3.2 billion in assets under management, half of that actually comes from the real estate industry itself. So some of the largest owners, operators, and developers of real estate assets are actually limited partners in our funds. And I spent 20 years in the traditional real estate finance world prior to coming to the venture community. And what I can say is real estate is effectively an instantiated bond. It's cash in, cash out. If it's not broken, don't fix it. And it's been really, really difficult to get this industry to adopt technology at all. If you think about it, I don't know how many people pay rent or rent apartments or rent any kind of home of any sort, but it's just the last couple of years when people started paying rent online. So the adoption curve is incredibly steep in terms of what the industry needs to do to get anywhere near the autonomous enterprise. There is no ERP software solution for the real estate industry at all. You talk to real estate landlords, anyone in a real estate company, they have no idea what enterprise SaaS is. I know that because I come from the industry. So what we do is we sit down with the real estate industry, we identify what their true pain points are, and then what we do with our venture investment team is we go find the tech that solves real problems. And that is the key to bringing this industry out of the Stone Age. Right now, the worst thing that possibly could have happened for the industry has happened with COVID. You artificially shut off demand, which is the single biggest factor outside of artificially inflating supply. So the industry is trying very hard in a hyperinflationary or inflationary environment across the globe to create deflationary pressure on the OpEx line. So that is where we've been focusing. How do you preserve NOI? How can you use data to reduce your operating expenses in a real estate building? That is how you get the attention of the industry. The other area we focus on is how do you create ancillary revenues? So how do you differentiate your product offering with generative AI, with other solutions in tech? So that's the approach we take. Very small tidbits, go get early wins within the organizations, create your champions at the C-suite and the board level, and then you have a captive audience to continue introducing tech solutions that matter to their businesses.
Fascinating. Thanks for keeping us grounded, I think, at times, especially we're somewhere there under the ceiling. Rajesh, as a service provider, you typically invest in ahead of time, ahead of many of your customers. What's top of your mind? Is it along similar saw patterns, building blocks, or are you almost fundamentally approaching it in a different way?
No, thanks for that question. So I'm Rajesh Rajappan. I'm a Senior Vice President at Hitachi Vantara, responsible for strategy and growth across our global markets. So when we look at an innovation agenda at an enterprise, it is at top of everyone's mind. Now, what does that mean? Means different things to different enterprises in terms of where they are in the maturity curve and what do they want to transform from a digital agenda standpoint, right? But this is a journey. This is not going to be a switch, like one day I'm going to become autonomous. It's going to be a journey. And it all starts with where do I get most return from an investment standpoint and designing the pieces accordingly and charting out the journey. And it all starts with a change in mindset from an enterprise perspective, right? What do I think about from an innovation standpoint and accepting the fact that technology is going to be a co-pilot to a workforce. It's not, there is always a concern. The moment you talk about something autonomous, there is a social issue of am I going to lose my job, right? So it is important to ensure that the workforce knows that technology is going to be a co-pilot, an assistant to them to make life easier and where they can focus on much more value-added aspects of the enterprise.
That's great. And Armen, in one of your previous jobs, you were head chief science officer at Genpact. I guess you have at least significant part designing innovation agendas. Of course, you have more different jobs since. What's top of your mind? What's your experience?
Thank you very much, Tom. And indeed, what comes to mind here in terms of the design of the innovation agenda as a key first step is assessing what capabilities can be brought to bear now. So as Chief Science Officer of Covenant Venture Capital, we think quite deeply on these topics my colleagues on the panel have been mentioning around what is the role of human labor and how should people's time be prioritized. And so when we consider artificial intelligence in particular, there is at its core biology supporting technologies such as computer vision. We have machines, and I use the term broadly, that can see. We have machines that can hear, computer audition. By extension, there's our sense of even smell, computer olfaction that exists. And so the opportunities can be quite profound regarding business processes in terms of what does it mean to have machines as part of analyst teams, operations teams, sales teams, and considering what can be brought to bear, all of a sudden you have a massive shift in time. As Ted mentioned, this point on critical thinking, creativity as examples, a human then will spend more time reading email as opposed to writing. That shift happens because if you can generate the content faster, you can highlight to the machine what needs to be tracked, then all of a sudden you have the time that a human does spend on something be much more impactful. So to underscore this idea of human senses being implemented in machines and augmenting human workforce.
Fascinating. And Nitin, I remember not too long ago, we had the same discussion on automation. You worked for different companies then. Again, as a provider, is this the same thought pattern, slightly different, but still the same, or what's changed for you?
So Tom, just to be sure, I'm with the same company still. It's been 6 years, run Mphasis. I was just worried he's going to go to touch after, smell and vision. So I'm like, thank God computers can't touch and feel yet, because that's very much a part of human, interaction that I'd like to retain. I'll shake your hand before we leave. I have a slightly different take on all of this, right? If you think about, I agree with everything that's said primarily because in the end, just one statistic that stood out to me last week when I was reading yet another article on generative AI was that 60% of the jobs that exist in the global economy today did not exist 50 years ago. 60% of what we do today, we couldn't have done 50 years ago. Right? When I first went on my first job, they were just introducing personal computers. Before that, you had to actually have files and paper and pen, back in the day. I can still write a paper and pen, but it's kind of getting harder and harder, right? So I think then you move that needle forward and you talk about horizon innovations across all horizons, Horizon 3 innovation, as you called out in the segment. I think we have a long way to go before we can think of an autonomous enterprise because we're still fairly wedded to the way we did business over the last 50 years and the big revolution 50 years ago was, of course, everything was introduced through computers, right? We had somebody writing a general ledger at a bank and we created a GL system and a core banking platform. Somebody was doing underwriting under a tree in the Lloyd's undermarket in London where it was the insurance market was born, and then you turned that into a underwriting system and a policy admin system and a claim system. We're still kind of far away from getting away from just automating those processes that we did over the last 50 years to actually thinking about autonomous enterprises. I run an IT services company. There are probably many people here from the industry. I'll give you one interesting example that even today when I talk to CIOs, it stands out as to how this thing happens, right? Anybody had to reset a password? Anytime in the last 30 days, right? What happens when you can't fix it through the process? You have to raise something called a ticket. You're familiar with that word? Raise a ticket. You raise a ticket, somebody will attend to it, and somebody will figure out what to do. Now you blow that up and say, okay, an application fails and goes down. the first thing the system administrator does is raises a ticket. Because then somebody will get engaged because something is broken. So you need to fix it, whether it's level 0, level 1, level 2, level 3. Practical, every day we do this, right? And we are such an innovative and creative world today with autonomous enterprises that we call it break fix. We still call it break fix, and we charge for it, by the way. You know, why do we charge for it? Because people pay for it. Why do they pay for it? Because that's the only way they've done it for the last 50 years. Until I see a ticket, I won't actually activate because I'm getting paid by the ticket. My simple answer to this problem is you see an orange light in your car and you take it to the garage because something is wrong. Most reasonable people will. I know a lot of people who don't, but most reasonable people will. Now think about, we have the last 10 years, 5 years, 6 months of data on all the tickets that have ever happened in an enterprise. Because after we do the break fix, we do something called the RCA report, right? Root cause analysis. What did we do to fix it? But it's just filed somewhere in some folder. Maybe it's on the cloud today, but that doesn't really make any difference. You take the dump of all of those tickets, every server log, every application log gives you data on an every second basis. You should be able to look at the patterns. Now you use machine learning to see what pattern caused what kind of failure in the past. Can I predict a failure from happening before it happens? Can I put a probability on the likelihood of it happening? And more interestingly, can I actually do the intervention before it fails? Now what I've done is I've taken a very simple process that we all get paid for every day and turned it into a autonomous process where I don't need any eyes on glass, I don't need anybody raising a ticket, I don't even need any intervention. Because the application or the whatever the infrastructure asset is, switch, server, router, will actually fix itself automatically because you've now got machine learning algorithm, basically pattern recognition. It's nothing but pattern recognition, going into the logs, looking at the RCA and creating the intervention automatically. Now there'll still be 20% of the times where you need a human intervention because a code level change has to happen, a patch has to be updated, you know, some API didn't work, some integration failed, but that's 20% of the times. We call them L2, L3 tickets where you need actually a software engineer to go in and do some code. So I think we are really running ahead of ourselves when it comes to looking at autonomous enterprise because the size of the opportunity in just fixing what we've built over the last 50 years and getting that to the next era is immense. And the reason I call it the next era is that there was a fundamental shift that happened in the last 5, 7 years where every enterprise is now consuming technology on demand, not on premise. That has never happened before. So I think we are still dealing with the tech debt of the last 50 years. Yes, you know, we have some very interesting use cases coming out of Horizon 2, Horizon 3. You know, yes, large language models will change a lot of what we do and will probably create a whole new wave of creative, critical thinking, you know, jobs. But the size of the prize is so large right now, just making sure that the enterprises go where they need to go over the last 50, you know, in terms of removing the debt for the last 50 years. And the last thing I'll say about the biggest benefit really will not, I mean, I wrote a whole book on it. It's called Transformation in Times of Crisis. Little advertisement, thanks, Phil. This is a really tough crowd, man. Nothing is sticking here. Thank God I'm not a stand-up guy. If you lose sight of the end consumer, then it's very hard to create anything autonomous. I mean, we have so much data on every consumer that, think of a bank, a retailer. How much of the data is being used? I think the application of anything autonomous for an enterprise to be able to expand revenue, automate a business process, has to start in front of the consumer. And to me, the biggest benefit that you will see coming out of things like AI, generative AI, large language models, all forms of automation should really be for you to be able to really know your customer. I mean, we understand of KYC as a compliance term, but actually KYC is a business term. How well do you really know your customer? If you really know your customer, you can use all the power of these new techs, and that really will pivot the whole, what we call the front to back mindset.
No, thanks for that. But also building on that, if I listen to you guys, it's not almost the obvious kind of technology jumping out, anything top of mind. Is the other way around. To drive automation is much more, to me, the capability to drive organizational change and technology. Do we need both? What's top of your mind, Rajesh, on your side? Or are you literally more building out these old-fashioned scanning of technologies, trying to figure out which magnitude it might come on, or is it literally some of if I build on Nitin's point, on some of changing our behavior, following customer behavior? It's much more about change than probably the innovation itself.
technology is going to be an enabler. It all starts with what do you want to do and what is your customer going to expect and how do you service them well, right? It is about how do you do things faster, how do you respond to your customers faster with fewer resources, right? And generating better outcomes. And that requires, one, a change in mindset in terms of how you start looking at it. And technology is only going to be an enabler for that. And there are going to be a lot of technologies that are going to evolve for a period of time. I think we are just seeing the evolution of large language models, and you're going to see a lot more of that coming in. And it is going to be not one technology or anything. It's going to be bringing all of these together. But at the end of the day, it all needs to start with what is it that you want to do for your customer.
Just coming back, yes, working. Again, beyond the unavoidable focus on anything ChatGPT, which themes, technology should organization really look out for? And as we have two venture capitalists, I think that's almost a natural. Angela, what's top of your mind? Again, what you're trying to identify, is it technology, or are you looking fundamentally different at it, almost literally from the outcome, from serving your real estate focus?
It's a great question because we struggle with this quite a bit. I agree with what was said here on both fronts in terms of the customer, because I don't think necessarily in real estate you're going to see the organizational change just because a lot of times these innovation teams, it's usually one person who sits in a silo who doesn't really have a lot of buy-in from the rest of the organization. And I think when you have these use cases that actually enable you to understand your customer, or there's a crisis moment, look at labor shortages, for instance. That's when we've been able to leverage where we can find computer vision as a source to address labor shortages. A very, very concrete example is in the multifamily renovation space. A lot of the particular standard ways that things have been done for the last couple of years, when you're scoping out a project, it typically takes 6 months to go measure out, have contractors walk through the building. But we invested in a company called Tailorbird, which uses computer vision. They scrape the internet. They can get within 1 inch of accuracy if you were to use human talent to scope out that project. And then they use a two-sided marketplace to bid out to the contractors. In that process, what our real estate customers are looking for is the 500 man-hours reduction, and they're also looking at the 100 to 200 basis point improvement in IRR on that project. So we've taken this example out to multiple real estate companies who are active tech-denying CEOs, I will say. That is the term that many of them have used. And we show, like, if you just use this solution, it actually makes your job much easier, it drives your return profile higher, and we're introducing you to something that we're not calling computer vision. We're calling it an enabler to help you achieve your effective targets for the end of the year so you can get your bonuses. I think that, at least in our minds, is finding that kind of technology that has broad scalability, where we can leverage our LPs, who are the real estate industry, to showcase that the technology actually works. And it is a herd mentality industry, so everyone wants to know what their competitor is using. That then helps us drive alpha from the venture capital perspective, because we then have an ability to roll it out to all of our real estate customers, which effectively, from a venture perspective, you need to ensure that you can get to scale very, very quickly and be the first mover. And so I think it's a combination of both. That's just one example from a labor shortage perspective. The other one we're really focused on is decarbonization. And I won't go into all the specifics, but irrespective of your politics and where you stand on climate change, the reality is physical risk is a real thing. And we've leveraged different types of tech solutions to help real estate asset owners address this theme across the board, whether it be from the raw materials through the construction automation process, the operating carbon of the building, the downcycling, recycling. We've used tech in various ways to address all of these problems. And I think that is the real area where you're going to see a major transfer of wealth and something that's actually going to be good so that we all have a planet in the foreseeable future.
That would be helpful, the last bit. Armen, you changed, or has anything changed from you since you moved from Dempact, driving the agenda there, to being venture capital? Is this the same approach, the same thinking, or have you literally changed your priorities, your way of thinking?
Sure. Thank you. And I'll pick up on Angela's comments here. Firstly, this idea on the value of human labor. So we can imagine, and as a world, and as investors, we go through this exercise, what would it be that every team member, every employee, every supplier, staff member, every hour of their time was precious? All of a sudden, you start seeking solutions that triage. So at the person's highest energy, they are interacting with the most valuable customers. At the points of their focus cycle, they are dealing with the highest risks. And so when you have that ability to triage and to focus a human's time, these types of technologies, in contrast to your colleagues, this instead of ticket view, like each ticket has different value, let alone the concept of a ticket. So it's optimizing around maximal human performance. And as we were discussing here, there's different technologies that can accentuate that. So companies that have this type of focus from the enterprise side to us are very interesting. By extension, also to the customer side, not in terms of productivity, but in terms of experience. So right here in New York, although there was massive uptake of consumer products such as Airbnb and Uber, it was not so in the beginning. You had literally decades old frames of reference, do not go into strangers' cars, do not visit strangers' homes. And you could quite literally go into a stranger's car to go into a stranger's home. And the accentuation there of, okay, there can be a better experience. It could actually be safer due to rating systems. You're not holding your hand out for a taxi or metal hurtling by. So again, startups that are facilitating these types of experiences, which are not immediately appreciated, are also of high interest. Picking up on this point of sustainability with some colleagues, we've conducted some analysis taking true to form this idea of machine perception. We asked the question, what if we could read and analyze all the earnings calls of the 58,000 plus public companies on the planet as they emerged and as they were being issued? So you have their computer audition. What's the tone? You have natural language processing under that. What's being said? And it's quite striking. Before 2020 Q3, almost no earnings calls mentioned sustainability-related topics. Now it's spiking, but not everywhere. There are enterprises that are not talking about it. So this has massive implications in terms of how those organizations will get to the next era in terms of how they're servicing their customers, interacting with suppliers, and competing. So the sentiment across the industrial base, with key points of leverage being such valuable data sources, is something also to be on the lookout for.
Great. Just building on your point, we have to work differently. For me, key point is, and it's a tough one to get your head around, how we should think about the operating model. And it's probably not one operating model for sure, but I think yesterday, Shelton from Amelia, previously IPsoft, was ganged up by a service provider clients. All your prediction about digital workers, you're slightly behind. That's one way of looking at it. But if I look at the other way around, an organization transforming to cloud, you need new operating models, unless you're just looking for efficiency gains. But if you want to be product-centric, if you want the velocity, you want all the other good stuff which cloud should bring, you have to change your operating model. Ted, I know you're quite skeptical on the term autonomous anyway, but the chance to let rip, that's one thing, but also how you guide your clients on those issues around operating model. Or are we too early? We think that no, that has to come much later. But how's the sequencing on that?
Yeah, so let me first respond to the skepticism about the word autonomous. And it's, by the way, not because I disagree that many of the activities in the enterprise are going to be sort of lights out, straight through processing. But rather that if we start saying autonomous all the time, that there isn't room in that word for employees. And I think employees are actually still going to be really important for a while, until Skynet, and Terminator shows up, and then we're all done. But anyway, leaving that dark possibility aside, right, we're still going to have companies that have employees. And I think we need to talk about the augmented workforce And we do need to think differently about our operating model, though, right? So why is it that we have the M-Form organization that we have today? It's because in order to scale large organization, we had to make communications be very efficient between employees. To do that, we created pyramids, hierarchies, and we separated out functions. So a finance function has all the finance people working in it, wherever you work in the world, and you have a local manager, and you have a regional manager, and it goes all the way up to the CFO. Well, what does technology do? It reduces the cost of communication. It reduces the cost of coordination. It also reduces the number of people that have to be in that communication loop to be able to effectively get the work done. And we can now start thinking differently. We can think around process, and we can think about how all the people within a process are matrixed into a process owner. And so that operating model for how we structure work within organizations is going to fundamentally change because of these technologies. I think that the interesting challenge is the people change is going to be much harder than the technology change. And we talked a little bit about that throughout the last couple of days. But I anticipate, and what we tell clients is that you will be on a journey for the next decade to arrive at a very different enterprise model, to run your business fundamentally differently than you do today, one where technology is much more central to the way that you think about and run everything. So it's not discontinuous with your autonomous message. I just think by saying augmented, we say, oh, by the way, the people still are here. They're being helped by the machines, not replaced or displaced by the machines.
Nitin is almost a segue. I think as a service provider, there's a lot of internal change, and I think you have to be honest. I think even automation on the supply side, there is displacement. I think not on the buy side, as we know. The jury is open, whatever happens to generative AI, all those technologies. How you drive that change, how you also take your teams on that journey.
So Tom, one very big value prop from our industry has always been creating net new talent in whatever is the next best thing next to sliced bread. Right? So all the way from the days of the mainframes to cloud and now to AI. So I think for us, we always operate on the edge of extinction, because if we don't change, we're not going to have a business to run. I'll give you an example. 10 years ago in this industry, a third of the revenue was all related to some form of testing. Simple testing. Unit testing, black box testing, regression testing, UAT, BUAT. I mean, we used to joke about it, we used to call it XAT, any form of testing. Today, that number is probably less than 5%, which is standalone testing, right? So we had to reinvent ourselves because we had to reskill those people to be able to become full stack engineers. Now, obviously, each company had a different business model of how do you create those scaled pyramids of talent. You can't really take a pure tester and turn him or her into a full stack developer, but if you have the core engineering skills, then you can, right? So I think for us, the reason we always think ahead, 5 years, 6 years ago, we went on this, at Mphasis at least, we bet the whole company on cloud and cognitive, because that seemed to be the wave, and cloud been playing out quite nicely. Cognitive is starting to play out quite nicely. We set up a quantum lab 3 years ago in Calgary and in India, at the two bookends, primarily because we think it's probably another 2 or 3 years away. But as always, it's been around for 10 years, 15 years. It's not really making an impact, but it's starting to make an impact in areas like optimization. So that's one example of a Horizon 3 bet that we made, where we think having a little bit of a forward-leaning stance will help us create that capacity at scale as it's needed. Right? So today we're able to create talent on demand primarily by reskilling rather than by hiring, because this talent doesn't really exist. And to me, I think the biggest change that every enterprise client we talk to, the change isn't to do with skill set or talent or technology or the application of it or the use case of it. It's almost always cultural. And so I think to me, that's the big elephant in the room always when we are trying to sell a large deal, and we'll hear about it in the next meeting as well. Isn't really about, and the cultural change is multifold. It's about using a third party. It's about using technology that was done, in an area that was, but I was doing it better. If you automate it, it won't be as good. I understand the pulse of the customer on the phone, right? But that doesn't mean you don't automate the contact center or the incoming call, right? I ask a simple question to many of our clients. I said, define what your digital drop ratio is to me. He says, what is that? So how many times a transaction, let's take a bank or insurance company or a healthcare company, how many times the transaction starts on the app or on the website and ends up in a call center? Those of you who use Amazon probably have never called Amazon. I probably called them once because I couldn't fit a pillow back into the box a mattress back into the box that I opened it from. Almost every other enterprise, the digital drop ratio can be as high as 80%, which means 8 out of the 10 times the transaction actually ends up in the call center. I'm not talking about a balance inquiry. I'm talking about a real transaction. That is partly cultural, partly technological. But I think the issue of change, the issue of implementing the change is very much starts with the mental model shift, and that can only happen top down.
Great. Just staring at the time is running away. Want to open up to questions, audience. Any questions for the outstanding panel?
Yeah. Hi. My question is to Armen. You spoke about some fascinating, aspects of leveraging technology, smell, and all. So we're hearing a lot about generative AI, and I've also read about new AI-based decoders that are tracking your brain activity and converting into continuous text and in a non-invasive manner. So is the final frontier, like our brain, what we are thinking, that is falling, and the risk of manipulation of your thoughts, or really in terms of putting your thoughts on paper, do you find it unsettling? Where is this technology leading us?
Sure, I'll immediately reply as an optimist, but as a
wait, this is wireless.
scientist.
Hold on.
Yes, thank you for the Matrix style plug-in there, Ted. So to unpack a few of the examples, so if we consider computer vision, there's processing in our primary visual cortex that is layered. So for example, if you see a loved one or an automobile, there's circles there, whether it's the wheel or the face of someone you recognize. That's processed in layers. Hearing is on frequency, almost like you unroll your cochlea. You have a piano in terms of frequency. Olfaction is even higher dimensional. You can sense different compounds, which is very interesting at scale at different real estate sites for safety, as an example, industrial security. What you're alluding to is this neural network structure around observation has been played the other way to also generate content. And indeed, there is research that can decode as an intercept some of the connections around what we are thinking. It's a basically extension of pattern matching. Very interesting research in terms of functional MRI. So a lot of these biological insights being implemented in the machine and increasing the processing speed and being distributed in networks, you get all sorts of exciting examples for different business models. So for example, Apple bought Shazam for $500 million for the simple audio recognition around what music is being played in a social setting. I believe in the enterprise and business processes. There's many Shazam-style apps to be discovered and deployed. And when you do that, you start to blow apart things like what is a ticket or what's needed. So that sensory capability and imagining where it could be deployed across the industrial base, I find tremendously exciting.
Neuralink is a good example of what you're referring to, by the way. So next time he's going to get Musk to come and talk to us about Neuralink.
I said at the beginning, I think I need an outstanding panel with the brain power. Some of us, I think, definitely over my capability.
There's a hand up there.
Patrick?
I want to run with Ted's point around using autonomous and the impact on the employee side. So I think we've talked about it in terms of the role of an enterprise and the workforce there. I want to hear from the providers, especially the one that I'm employed at. What's your take on what's your take on the role of autonomy from a service delivery point of view, and how are vendors dealing with that from an employer branding point of view?
The pink slips in the mail.
Yeah, I think this is going to go back to what are the outcomes we are going to be helping the enterprises with, right? And I think they've talked about the testing and how that has evolved, right? Pretty much all aspects of this are going to evolve. How does coding happen? Today, coding can be improved in terms of productivity from using generative AI. You could generate the initial code with generative AI and then refine on it, right? What that means is more productivity. That means you could do more for less, right? I think similar aspects are going to be applied across different parts of services, right? Contact center is one where there is a lot more autonomous aspects that could be brought in, where humans' intervention would be needed for more high-end kind of responses compared to what is happening today.
You know,
So
I was having
those are
an
two examples.
interesting conversation with the CIO last week on something similar. And what I heard was, I think this has been said in public as well by the same person, so, but I won't give their name. He says, it's not that AI will replace jobs or people. AI will replace people who don't use AI. So I think you have to upskill yourself. You have to be able to use tools, and you have to be able to get more productive. Just because you can write code faster doesn't mean that we don't need a programmer or a developer. Because the number of lines of code being written are, by the way, growing exponentially. We need more developers. We can't find enough. So it all depends on what your current job. Sales can never be automated, let me tell you that. So if you're in sales, you're golden, as long as you meet your quota, right?
Yeah, of course.
Great. Unfortunately, time is linear, not autonomous, so I'm staring at us. But big thank you for my great panel, and give them a big round of applause.